Hi, my name is Ryan Bozzi, and this is my video essay about the Spanish American War for Dr. Campbell's class. So, here I'll be analyzing 6 primary sources from this era of the Spanish American War that either support or refute imperialism of the United States, and I'll explain what each author is saying in their arguments, how they support each one, and from that we can conclude why the U.S. invaded and occupied the Philippines. So here's my introduction. Spanish-American War of 1898 marked the moment when the United States emerged as a world power. The victory over Spain brought as a result U.S. overseas territories, including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Sudden expansion unleashed fervent debate across the nation. Should America stay true to its long-cherished democratic values or become an empire? As presented here, this given from the campus. The 6 primary sources: Henry Cabot Lodge, Reverend Charles G. Ames, Albert Beveridge, William Jennings Bryan, and the Sherman Commission, and then Benjamin Flower, demonstrate how politicians, thinkers, and reformers either supported or argued against American imperialism. As such, they demonstrate that the U.S. invasion occupation of the Philippines were a function of economic aspiration, racialized ideology, and faith in moral destiny, masquerading as an appeal to benevolence. Imperialists such as Lodge and Beveridge maintained that expansion was a matter of patriotic and divine duty, while anti-imperialists such as Ames, Bryan, and Flower firmly denied the hypocrisy of speaking liberality while denying it abroad. The Sherman Commission was represented the final official rationale, cloaking conquest in a manner benefiting the language of civilian and reform. The occupation of the Philippines was less about spreading democracy and more about maintaining power, profit, and racial hierarchy under a moral disguise. So, um, first, I analyzed Henry Cabot Lodge, his essay, "The Business World versus the Politicians." So, he argued an imperialist political agenda before the Spanish American War actually happened. He kind of argued that in favor of imperialism, that pretty much that a nation isn't constantly expanding their land, influence, trade, and commerce aren't valuable or strong. And he expressed like a lot of fear that the U.S. is going to fall behind other like rapidly expanding superpowers. And he like also appealed a lot to like the pride of the American nation to grow their power, not lag behind other growing nations, as well as like economic competition and national pride just being main reasons. So I looked at this quote over here. For example, he never for an instant thought that we were to remain stationary and cease to move forward. Um, I have that right here. On this second page is where he said that. Basically, I picked this just to kind of. He was talking about George Washington and Monroe's like policies, kind of about like that were put in place uh, to help America like individualize themselves from the British Empire after they overcame their control. So like here, he's saying like, but like even though we're supposed to be like neutral, he didn't want us to be like neutral forever. Is basically what he's saying. So that's like one way he supports, excuse me, his argument. And again, he's arguing here the tendency of modern times is toward consolidation. He brings that up right on this third page of the primary source. He believes that if the U.S. is like complacent, then they're going to lag behind everyone, and they're going to get consumed by other nations. So, and he's saying like tendency of modern times for consolidation. He says that to support his claim that they're not going to be able to keep up if they don't imperialize. So, and then I kind of continue that point by quoting this part, saying the great nations are rapidly absorbing for their future expansion. And then I move on to the other part. He says, as one of the great nations of the world, the United States must not fall out of the line of march. Again, right here, and then I left out this part because I just wanted to cut down on space, and I really just wanted to highlight these two portions of the quote, just to kind of just get to the point. So I included this just to display, like, illustrate his main point that he makes in his essay, that like he really wants the United States to imperialize and keep growing and expanding, to not lag behind. So by taking the Philippines, they would they wouldn't be a victim to other great nations of the world. Right there. And and again, as I stated earlier, he appeals to the American citizen's sense of pride. So kind of like more of an emotional appeal that like transcends material, kind of like the material gain of like taking over land and resources, and whatnot. So here on the third page of his, right here, he kind of appeals, and again, he even labels it as like humiliating as well in his essay. So he believes like it's a big like pride thing to fall behind in terms of like ranking of power among the world, like global nations. So that is what Lodge is arguing in his excuse me, in his essay. So moving on to the second paragraph, indirect, I started to talk about Reverend Charles G. Ames, who was an anti-imperialist, and he like kind of directly opposes what Lodge says. So I feel like this is a good segue. So he argued, he has a very clear argument of how racism, religion, and economic interests are used to defend imperialism in America. So, and he argues that American energies should be directed at home. So let me open up this. Let me open up his primary source real quick. Right. So right in the beginning, he believes American energy should be directed at home. He's someone who is very. He'd rather focus on what is important in the like helping out the people of the nation first, rather than globalizing, expanding horizons. And he's convinced that like he's also convinced that imperialism is just corrupting Americans to believe that like might is right, and might alone is the only thing that will make people like it makes you valuable and strong. So, and he demonstrates that when he says, we must govern either with or without the consent of people. If without their consent, it must be expressed through republican forms. If we govern them without their consent, it must be military occupation. There is third possibility. So here he's very frustrated. The Reverend is frustrated because he like the United States government creates kind of this like illusion of consent, that like, oh, like if they do consent to being taken, if like the foreign country does consent to being taken over, then okay, great, they don't have to militarize. But if they refuse, then it doesn't matter, they're still gonna go and take over the nation. And he's kind of saying like, there is a third possibility, we don't have to resort to this. So again, here it is in the original in the original document right there. And right, he says by suffrage. So voting and and again, explaining his frustration. And we are to do it by war, by the right of might. Can we not show the world a more excellent way? He's very frustrated. He wants to go back to the roots of like how we founded America. It was founded by groups of righteous individuals who were being oppressed by an imperialist empire, and they fought so hard to break free of that. And now, like America is becoming what they sought to destroy. And um, this is he wants to remind America, um, like the struggle that they were birthed from, and um, become an example of like becoming like being better and showing them a better way to to deal with like these kind of situations, dealing with foreign affairs. Um, right here it is said, and he is not completely denouncing the existence of um, like using military might. Um, Although he's arguing that like the policy of imperialism threatens to change the temper of our people and to put us in a permanent attitude of arrogance, testiness, and defiance towards other nations. So he makes it clear that that a selfish desire for dominance in order to fill a sense of pride or control over other people and like have this great influence, it's it's going to negatively affect like the spirit of people, because he was the speaker, the Reverend Charles G. Ames. He's like a very religious man. He advocates like for people being good and whatnot. So this is like the audience he's appealing to. He wants to argue for like morality and take this moral stance. So again, here's the reference to the original document. Permanent attitude, right? Yep, there it is. And then he even argues that having military power is necessary, but they are a menace and terror of popular government. They compel centralization of power. So he's not saying that it's totally like bogus to have a military. It has its value right here. He says it in the main primary source. But he says that there's definitely a line that has been crossed, is his main argument, and he kind of uses, and I'm using these, I use this quote to kind of support against the counter argument of saying, oh, well, what would you do without a military? Well, it's not saying that he doesn't support the military. It's just saying that he believes it's necessary, but there's a line. And he goes far as to argue that overspending on military offense and defense will be a waste because they will be of little value in peace, since nearly all the world is open to commerce. In war, they would be remote and exposed, inviting attack and requiring defense. We create the necessity of spending billions on fortifications for our extending coastline. So he just again he kind of brings up a very practical point here, that maintaining military defenses. Right here, he sends it in the primary source, that it's just very it's a point of weakness, and overspending on military, like imperialization, is going to be very it can backfire if like the United States spreads themselves too thin across too many nations. That's a lot of maintenance, and it's very impractical. So the Reverend takes a very moral, like a standpoint that appeals to people's moral consciousness, warning against pride and dominance and being power hungry, essentially. So next one I decided to look at was Albert Beveridge giving his Senate speech, which preaches the very opposite sentiment of Ames. So I will open that up as well. Right. So, um, okay. So, 1900, after the Spanish American War, he argues a moral and divine stance, kind of like how Ames does. He does like a moral divine stance, but his Beveridge is the complete opposite, saying that like God's will is that is that it's their moral duty to kind of correct the ways of the Philippines. So he argues that. So it's a clear argument of how racism, religion, and economic interests were used to defend imperialism. Like racist stereotypes are used everywhere uh, in his essay to make Filipinos seem like subhuman and unable to self govern. And he justified the use of imperialism by turning it into a conquest of holy duty. And he even like twisted the words of the Constitution to fit his own agenda, to like apply to only like self to right here like that the principles of the Constitution only apply to self governing men. So they don't really the Filipinos they do not get the benefit of being self governed. And he kind of appeals to the economic gain of imperialism as well, and just overall disguised exploitation as generosity. Um, so, like here, seems some of the quotes I use. They are not a self-governing race. They are Oriental Malays instructed by Spaniards in the latter's worst state. They have no continuity of thoroughness of industry. They will quit work without notice and amuse themselves until the money they've earned is spent. They're like children playing in men's work, and calls them incurably indolent. So, um, right here in the original document is how he describes them. And um, so, yeah, I use those quotes to help support that argument he makes. And he twists about the Declaration of Independence. He twists a lot of its principles to only apply to self-governing men, arguing that the Declaration only applies to people capable of self-government. How dare any man prostitute this expression of the very elect of self-government peoples to a race of Malay children of barbarism? So he claims that um, because the Constitution was written to apply to people like in mind. It was written for people who are like basically Americans and are able to, I guess, fit this like arbitrary description of being, I guess, able to be considered self governing men. And but really, this could be like used. This was just used to as a way to exploit people like of a foreign country. Again, here is the original document right here. And here's a quote where he talks about how taking over the Philippines, invading and occupying them is like a self-righteous claim of divine duty. So this is divine mission in America, and it holds for us all the profit, all the glory, not the happiness to man. We are trustees of the world progress, guardians of its righteous peace. So right over here is where it's talked about. And then, and he brings up the economic advantages of taking over Philippines. China is our natural customer. She is nearer to us than to England, Germany, or Russia, the commercial powers of the present and the future. They have moved nearer to China by securing permanent bases on her borders. The Philippines give us a base at the door of all the East. So again, um, he disguised overall Beveridge. He just shows how some people use religion and race to rationalize creating an empire. Um, and yeah, Beveridge he twisted the Constitution by kind of like interpreting the policies in his own way, and he used the religion as a crutch to further exploit his to further justify the exploitation. Uh, so this is like kind of how he used morality and divine duty to support imperialism, kind of like in a kind of like opposite to what Ames was arguing, because he argued a moral standpoint of like doing the right thing. Him, Beveridge, was more using morality to a different kind of morality, rather, to justify doing what they wanted. So next up is going to be Bryan, William Jennings Bryan, who also had a very like converse view. His view directly opposed Beveridge's. So his argument was that imperialism contradicts democracy, believing that ruling others by force violate the Constitution and the Declaration itself, and just its founding principles. He exposes like his and the way he supports this argument is that like he exposes the hypocrisy of America's claims to teach democracy. Even though it silences the people it conquers, and that like all the people are that the government is just banning its founding principles for the sake of having control. So in his address to argue against the U.S. invasion, he one of the quotes I picked, he says, "Some argue that American rule of the Philippine Islands will result in the better education of the Filipinos. Be not deceived. If we are to govern them without their consent and given them no voice to determine the taxes which they must pay, we dare not educate them, lest they turn to read the Declaration of Independence and Constitution of the United States and mock us for the inconsistency." So, so he kind of approached this from a different angle, saying that like, claiming that like if the U.S. really wants to, because there's this whole like idea that in support of imperialism, that like if the U.S. Takes over the Philippines, they're going to enlighten the Filipino population. But Bryan argues that if the U.S. government was to like truly enlighten them and like actually educate them, it's a contradiction of logic, because they will like if the Filipinos were to be truly educated, they would learn that the U.S. invaded the Philippines and exploited its people without their consent. But the Americans aren't going to actually teach them that. What they're going to teach them is what they want them to know. And that is, and what Bryan is arguing is that it's basically, this is tragic. If, like, then that's not actually educating them. That's not enlightening them. This is a mirage, you know. It's not actually not sound logic. And here is the original source. So this is one of the things that he argued that I thought was profound, that kind of approached it from a different angle. And another, the next primary source I looked at was the Sherman Report. I'll open that up real quick. So this was more of a like official government justification of the occupation of the Philippines. Although like the other ones were kind of like speakers and reformists and politicians. This is like a group, an actual like U.S. government document that was published. And basically the main argument here, the main idea here is that like it legally rationalized U.S. control after Spain's defeat. So this isn't just like an opinion or like one writer or something. This is like the U.S. government speaking upon and delivering like what they believe is justice. So it legally rationalized U.S. control of the Philippines after Spain's defeat, and basically argued again that U.S. domination was really them being benevolent to the Philippines, saying that like, oh, you need us to guide you and conquer you and show you what's right and wrong. It argued, excuse me, argued that the Filipinos were a race that desperately needed guidance, and they also argued something different, that like the Filipinos were too scattered and they didn't really have like a unified identity, kind of like the United States, and that they don't have a sense of unity that the U.S. had. So they need the U.S. to come and kind of um, like uh, condense them, I guess. So the U.S. turned this like global empire that they're expanding into moral responsibility. So, for example, in this quote, this just explains the official statement that of how the U.S. Got legal admission to occupy the Philippines. It says the sovereignty which Spain possessed and exercise of the Philippines islands has now received a complete and indivisible consummation. So, I'll show that right now. Here it is in the original document. And then so here in the Sherman report he said, I have to use the quote, there can be no real conflict between American sovereignty and the rights and liberties of the Philippine people. So it um, it just claims that the American sovereignty is exactly what it complements the Filipino rights, and just claims that the rights and liberties won't be infringed upon, even though they are kind of using this illusion of consent to just enter and take over the land, uh, just because they won a war that the Filipinos uh, that like it's not really the Filipinos' choice. They didn't have like a part in any of the consent, but the U.S. is using that this idea that their sovereignty just perfectly blends with the rights and liberties, and that they perfectly complement each other, and just talks about how the the U.S. desperately needs to reform the nation. Again, here's where they talk about how scattered the tribes and peoples of the Philippines are, a variegated assemblage of different tribes and peoples who lack the sentiment of nationality, desperately need the guidance and tutelage of an enlightened and liberal sovereign power. So here it is in the main document, right here, right here, and right. So, oh, right. So, um, that's just basically how they argued their point. And then the last paragraph, or last source, I analyzed Benjamin O'Flaherty's essay "Some Dead See Fruit of Our War of Subjugation." So he basically completely dismantled the moral image that the Sherman Report tried to build up. So he argues that he uses like real events and anecdotal evidence to argue that imperialism of the U.S. is nothing more than the moral decay of this very nation. He talks about a story. He says the fact that our soldiers are becoming familiar with despotic acts and savage practices, and they see on every hand a disregard for the very things our fathers held most fundamental and essential to a republic, such as freedom of the press, respect for civil authority, and the rights of man should be the subject of the gravest concern to thoughtful lovers, free government everywhere. So Flower is basically saying that the main concern of the United States needs to be um, the thoughtful lovers of free government everywhere. So the people who love to spread to influence freedom and um, democracy to all other nations. Because the point of globalizing is to the main point of imperializing should be that the people of the United States want to spread the good, the good and moral values of democracy. That everyone gets a free voice, everyone gets an opinion, everyone is equal in the eyes of the government, and everyone is uh, free to exchange ideas, and it's free exchange of thoughts. But really, what's happening, as I explained here, like by the horrors of um, like war and savage practices, is that the United States is using this guise of democracy to say that they're all these great things, but they're really not. He said, and this is a kind of a more anecdotal thing. He says, as we approach the town, the word passed along the line that there would be no prisoners taken. It means that we're to shoot every living thing in sight, man, woman, and child. So again, exposing the horrors, the reality of imperialism, that this is what's really happening. So, oh wait, this is Sherman. Let me pull up Benjamin Flower. So, right here was the anecdote I just shared, and then the previous quote I shared right there. So, yeah, that's my analysis. Thank you.